Rauscher here. Welcome back to our series on adult spiritual development. This is the book about the journey from primitive ego to an enlightened consciousness. And as you've probably picked up from the previous 3 chapters, this is a journey that I believe is really important for the human species as we move into the 21st century. I hope you're beginning to get a sense of the importance of all of what we're talking about here. Okay, today we're going to be talking about Chapter 4. This is called Birth of the Self. Again, there's an awful lot of material in that chapter, but I'll try to hit the key points here for you. Number 1, primitive ego psychology, which is what the book is based on. It's, in other words, learning to pay attention and develop internal self-awareness of how we think and how we use our mind and the kind of beliefs that we have and what kind of energy that creates in the world. So primitive ego psychology is a big word for a simple process, and that's just increasing self-awareness. In other words, what we're doing is we're learning to look inside rather than outside in the world all the time. All the great spiritual teachers tell us that all the growth that we're going to experience is going to come from inside, vision inside, not a vision out on the world, okay? Primitive ego loves to look out on the world and blame the world for everything. What we're starting to look at now, obviously, is that that's not true, that that's an illusion. So what do we mean by self-awareness? Very simple. What we're doing is we're turning on the light of our observing ego, intentionally in other words, and we're shining that light of our attention into the shadows of our unconscious primitive ego. Okay? So again, much of what we're going to be talking about is really pretty simple in context or in philosophy. It's a lot of work to do it because usually when we look inside, like I said previously, we typically don't like what we see. That's why we don't look inside too often. But until we do, of course, we're not going to be terribly happy or have good, healthy relationships. So, second big point, that was the first one, that primitive ego is basically growth and self-awareness. This is a big one. Our world, and definitely our primitive ego, is convinced that all the bad things that happen, it's somebody else, like Satan or some bad person or whatever. What we learn as we begin to grow into an awareness of self and an awareness of our primitive ego is that all of the evil, all of the suffering, all of the pain that gets created in this world is created in the hearts of our human species. In other words, it's our human beliefs, our bent nickel beliefs, and we'll get to that in a second. But it's our bent nickel beliefs that tend to be kind of judgmental, and we tend to blame other people for all of our problems, and we'll get to that one also in a second. So at any rate, sin and evil is not created by an external Satan or an external anything. It's created in our own human heart, and it's based on the energy that we send into the world using the various beliefs, most of which are judgmental. Third big point. Primitive ego loves to blame others for all of our problems, especially our parents. Basic concept here in number 3 is that there is no such thing as a perfect parent. That means every single one of us come from some level of dysfunction. And we love creating our sad life story. The primitive ego is an expert writer when it comes to creating the sad life story of our life. And why we're not successful, poor us, it's because of some external influence, typically parents or someone else. The reality, and this is where we begin to really get in touch with our growth of ourself, is that every single aspect of our life, let me say that again, every single aspect of our life has been created by us, not our parents, not the neighbor down the street, not our partner, not our friends. Not our life situation. It's been created by the choices that we've made, one choice at a time, our entire lives. Now, the good news on that is real obvious. If that's true, which it is, then guess what? We can create any life we want to create. All we have to do is recognize that we have the power to make new choices, and we can begin to create our new story. But that's the adult awakened consciousness. The primitive ego is always going to go back to the sad life story of childhood, okay? And what I'm suggesting is, don't go there. It's an illusion. The reality, we make our own choices, and we create the life that we want to live, consciously or unconsciously. And unfortunately, most of us do a lot of that creating unconsciously before we wake up and become self-aware of the primitive ego. All right, next big point. This is a real big one. We'll hit this again in future chapters, but let me give you a brief introduction right now. Bent nickel exercise. What do we mean by a bent nickel belief? In workshops that I offer to people, what I would do is I would give two groups a whole pile of nickels. And then I would tell one group, the higher you can stack your pile of nickels, that means you have a successful life. So the higher the stack can get, the more successful you're going to be. Now, in the other group, I gave them two red bent nickels. They were just slightly bent. And what I mean by that is that they distort reality, okay? That's what a bent nickel does. So I would give them two bent nickels, put them on top of one another, and then I would tell them, now those are power nickels. So go ahead, and you folks now over here, you stack your pile, and we'll see who can build the most successful life. Well, obviously, the pile that was on a solid nickel got quite high usually, okay? The people who were working on this other pile couldn't get it more than this high before it would start to tilt and fall over. And then I would give by example, I would say, okay, now here's what the world is going to tell you. And of course, that second group would always try 3 or 4 times and not be able to do it. I would say, well, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. Maybe you're not competent. Maybe you don't have the skills to create a good stack of nickels, which is equivalent to a successful life. Maybe you're just not bright enough. Now, that's what the world tells us when we can't seem to get traction on a happy, successful life. The problem is obvious. We've got a bent nickel belief that distorts reality. And if we distort reality, and here's a real good example of a bent nickel belief, then we're never going to be able to create a successful life because we believe our sad story, right? So this is probably one of the most powerful bent nickel beliefs, although there's a bunch of others, and we'll get to that. So, at any rate, if that's a bent nickel belief and we can get rid of it, then we can get on with creating our life by making choices and recognizing that we really are self-empowered. Final big idea. What is the goal of our journey to an adult, conscious, evolved, adult, mature consciousness or ego? It's simple. What we're going to do is we're going to learn how to become compassionate to other people, not do compassion. Our world teaches us, and this is kind of a bent nickel, that you got to go out and you got to do compassionate things. You got to be compassionate for people. You got to feed them. You got to help them, blah, blah, blah. We can do compassion till the cows come home. But until we become self-aware, what we're going to do is we're going to do compassion until somebody challenges our primitive ego beliefs. And the minute they do that, we're going to go on the defensive, then if they continue to challenge, we're probably going to get a little bit aggressive and go on the offense, and we're going to ruin relationships with others around us. We're going to become hurtful. You cannot sustain the doing until you've achieved self-awareness. And that's a very simple one to demonstrate. Just ask someone in your family to come up and argue with you. In other words, take one of your beliefs and just say you're stupid. That's a belief that just doesn't make any sense. And watch what happens inside. Okay, even when you know it's a game, watch what happens inside. What you're doing now is you're observing yourself as you're beginning to relate to others. And that's the goal. Okay, so our goal here is to change ourself through self-awareness, not others. Recognize that our goal is becoming compassion, not doing it. Remember the bent nickel belief. If we have a bent nickel belief, it's going to distort reality because it's not true, and it's going to seriously limit our choices and our ability to create the life we want. One of the basic bent nickels, obviously, is blaming others, and we love to blame parents, okay? Remember, evil is not created by outside forces, including Satan. It's created in the human heart. Whenever we use a bent nickel belief that tends to be judgmental of others. And finally, our goal here in this course is learning how to become self-aware and intentionally engaging the observing ego so that we can begin to look inside that primitive ego unconsciousness and find out all the bent nickels that are hiding in there. And we're going to do a lot more of that in future chapters. Okay? This is a fun chapter because we're beginning now to really think about how we're going to change who we are, not the world. Okay? We're beginning to change self. Okay, have a good week. We'll see you down the road.